Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a lovely crafty week. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a little home decor project that uses some of the art parts. I've had these little things in my drawers for some time and it's time they got used, and it's in response to a challenge over at Simon Says Stamp where the theme is yellow, and I thought those little flowers look like dandelions, and you will see by the end of this what that inspired. And I'm going to be using some parts from this kit as well. So both of them are by Wendy Vecchi, and you don't always have to do the project that they suggest on the front of the cover, and I'm going to mix and match my elements. So I'm just taking a few pieces plus my three little dandelion flowers and I'm ready to go. The nice thing about these bits and pieces is that they're already cut out, and you can just move them around and mix them up until you get a little composition that you like, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of getting a rough idea of where I'm headed, and I needed somewhere to put some wording, and I've cut out this little plaque which is from the hanging sign Sizzix die, the Tim Holtz die, and I think that's where I'm going to put my quote. I'm going to be using my distress paint in lots of different ways to colour my little home decor project. So I've got wild honey, mustard seed, picket fence, broken china. I might use a little bit of evergreen bough, and I've got, what's this one called? Peeled paint. So I want my baseboard to reflect the sky, and I'm going to try out a little technique where you sort of marble your paints together, and I've seen this done a few times and it works quite well to give a sort of random effect. And I think if I use the two colours broken china and picket fence, I can get it to look a bit like a cloudy sky. So I'm wetting the surface of the board first. So I'm hoping that this will stop my paints sinking straight into the board, and it will help them flow together on the surface once I start to spray this with water. So I'm just adding liberal amounts of the paint just randomly across the board. I'm kind of thinking while I'm creating cloudy summer sky and I'm just adding a little bit of the evergreen bough. I thought I'd just get a little bit of contrast going on, a couple of dark areas, and then I'm going to take my water spray and really give it a good soaking, and you can see the paint starting to move straight away, kind of wicks out into the water and then into each other. And then I'm just moving it around by just slightly tilting the board and letting the paint run into one another. So, and you can see it really does give a sort of marbled effect, and you just have to be a little bit careful that you don't move it about too much. And then I'm just going to start to dry it off. I think you can see here that it's starting to make gaps when I'm using my heat gun, so I think it's probably better just to leave this to dry on its own. So I'm just going to stop using the heat gun and cover as much of the board as I can and leave it to one side to dry naturally. So whilst that's drying, I'm going to start working on some of the other elements. So I'm going to be colouring my little dandelions first. I'm using mustard seed and a little bit of wild honey to give them that lovely golden yellow colour. And then I'm using the peeled paint, which is my favourite green in the distress paint range. I use this one quite a lot, and as you can see, it's really easy to cover these pieces. I'm going to give them more than one coat, but you know, I'm just doing one coat at a time. This is what's going to become my grass, and I'm going to be using this little piece as the place where I'm going to put my wording. Because this is actually chipboard rather than the artboard, that you can see that the paint sinks into this a little bit quicker. And as often happens when you're creating, you realise actually I'd perhaps quite like to do this another way round. And I decided that I'd quite like, because I'm going to put black around the edge of the grey chipboard, to actually use black around the edges of all the other pieces. So it's going to mess up the fact that I've painted them already, as you'll see, but I'm going to edge everything with black, and then I'm going to go back and put on my next coat of colour. So this is actually just the back of the plaque, and you'll see what I mean in a second about it messing up the front, unless you're really, really careful. So not only was I not very careful, as you can see, but I was also a little bit impatient. And sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. And at first I thought I quite liked this edge with this sort of grey mottling effect, that because of picking up the little bits of the black soot. And I did go with this for a little while, but you'll see that I do change my mind about it, because I thought it looked a little bit of a mucky finish rather than an obvious shading. So I'm just using the top of my distress paint to actually blend the grey around the edge of this little plaque. And then I'm coming back to do coat number 2 on all of my other little pieces. And this is when I'm starting to think, that wasn't quite such a good idea. And I start to lighten the inside of the little plaque. Which I think looks a little bit better. I'll change it a bit more later on. So now I'm going back to my board, and you can see this definitely is taking a little while to dry. So I'm just going to hurry this top piece up, because I know that I want to do this again, because I've got some areas where it hasn't quite covered the board. So back on with my paints, and I decided I didn't really like the evergreen bough either, so I'm just going to knock that out altogether, and I'm just going to use the 2 colours, so the picket fence and the broken china. And I think you may see some of the green showing through, but I'm not too worried if it doesn't. So again, I'm adding plenty of water and then just moving things around, and I think this time you can see, oh, that's my dog barking in the background, that I'm getting a much better cloudy effect second time round. So I want to add a little bit of shading into this green strip, so I'm just going to dot on a little bit of the yellow, which is the mustard seed, and then I'm going to use the actual dauber itself of the picket fence just to blend in the colour. And don't be too afraid to do this. I've got a little bit of something on there, because it soon wipes off the top of your little dauber. So even on the white with the black that I did earlier, just press it a few times and wipe it with a tissue, and it's good as new. So I like that mottled effect a bit better. And then whilst I have that slightly lighter colour on my dauber, I'm just going to catch the edge of the leaves of my little dandelions. And again, just to add a little bit of shading, a little bit of interest. So I'm quite happy with this piece now, like how it's turned out. So I'm going to put that to one side and let that dry off. And the next element I'm going to colour are these 2 little swells, and I need to paint them all over, so I'm going to paint them black on both sides. And it was at this point that I decided I'd quite like to add black, because although the size of these art pieces are quite dark, I think it could use, with the bright colours, a bit more drama by having the black edge. So I'm using my paint dabber where I can, and then I'm just taking and squeezing some of the paint onto my craft mats, and then using a paintbrush to get into all the nooks and crannies. Now this wasn't too drastic a decision for this little piece, because it's quite easy to keep everything on the edge, but obviously when it comes to my little dandelions, it's going to be a whole different ball game, and I'm definitely going to have to repaint these. But I only needed another extra coat, so it really didn't matter too much. So I'm just painting the other side of my swirls. Making sure to get all the edges of these as well. And then it's time to tackle all the edges of my dandelions. And you can tell already that the darker edge definitely makes everything stand out a bit more. So I'm quite pleased that I did it in the end, even though, as you can see here, I'm definitely going to need to repaint the surface of my little dandelions. So this time, making sure that everything is dry, just reapplying the paint. As you can see, it's only going to take me one coat this time. So starting out with the wild honey and then blending in some mustard seed and just catching the edges again with the wild honey. And then finishing off little stalks. And then this time using the yellow on my craft mat just to add in that shading around the edge of the leaves. So as I start to think about the finishing touches for this little home decor project, I just thought I'd mention it's quite likely that you haven't got the elements that I've got, and you may wish to go out and buy them so that you can copy this little design idea. But you know, if you want to have a look at some of the things that you have got, you'd be looking at perhaps alternatives to the flowers. Could be paper flowers, they could be die cut paper flowers, you could die cut chipboard if you have big dies. So you could put these pieces together in lots of different ways. I mean, the square background is quite easy enough to achieve. You can use packaging that comes in with your crafting supplies, perhaps layer up a couple of pieces of card to get that thick chipboard look. The bottom piece could be cut with decal edge scissors, for instance, or a border punch. So there's lots of alternatives. So you have a good think about what, you know, if you like this design, what you could come up with the stash that you have available. So I thought I might add a little bit more texture to this scallop strip that's going to form the ground from which my dandelions are growing. And I'm going to use my dot fade mask, which is one of the Tim Holtz range, and I'm just using the paint dauber to gently rub the paint through the mask. Just be a little bit careful, don't put too much pressure onto the top because you'll get smudging, and obviously as I move along I'm going to have to dry the dots first. So just positioning the mask again, not worrying too much about it lining up, and then lightly applying the paint. And I got a better effect second time because I didn't apply quite so much pressure. So learned by my first effort that definitely keep it nice and light. So you might want to start your paint dauber off on your craft mat, and then you don't need to actually press once you're rubbing the paint over your mask. And then again, for some emphasis, I'm just going to take some black soot distress paint and I'm going to just ink the edges of the little grass strip. I'm also going to add some of that distress paint to finish off the edges of the main plaque itself. And that's easy to do. Again, when you're inking or painting any edges with your distress paints or distress stains, always start the ink off on your craft mat rather than trying to push against the side of the piece that you're inking, because if you do that you're likely to damage the applicator of either your distress paint or your distress stains. So definitely start the paint or the ink flowing on your craft mat, and then use the applicator to gently swipe the ink or the paint around your project. And you can see here that I'm definitely going back and turning this little plaque into a white plaque without the grey edging. I did want to introduce a little bit of that yellow colour onto my little plaque where the wording's going to be, and I've just added a little bit of water to my distress paint, and then I'm just tapping my paintbrush against my finger to create a few little splatters. So I'm starting by doing it with the mustard seed. And I always forget when I start these kinds of things, move your other work out of the way, because you can't control where these little dots go. And I'm also using some of the wild honey, and I'm achieving finer dots by just flicking the actual top of the brush with my finger, and that does give really fine splatters, and I'm doing it in both of the colours. So a little bit difficult to see on camera, but as you can see here, make sure your work is out of the way, otherwise you'll just have to take a baby wipe and wipe off any little splatters that have got into places where they shouldn't. So you need a good strong glue to put all your pieces together once you've got them decorated how you want them, and I am increasing the length a little bit by not putting this right on the edge of the square. I just needed, I felt, a little bit more length because of the height of my little dandelions. So I'm using hot glue to put all my pieces together. Now I could have had all my little dandelions the same length, but I've decided to have them gradually decreasing in height. So I'm just using my scissors to cut through this artboard, and then I'm attaching them onto the so that they sit just inside one of the scallops on my ground, my little scalloped grass area. So when you're creating little home decor pieces like this, and I'm just deciding on where I'm going to put these flourishes on the finished piece, I just thought I'd talk to you about the wording. It's always nice to have some kind of meaningful quote on these sort of little projects, and I just thought I'd talk to you about how I come up with the things that I use. Sometimes I've already seen a quote and I'm doing a piece because I've got a quote in mind, and that tends to be something that I've seen on Pinterest or just happened to see perhaps even on someone else's artwork, and I thought, you know, I like those words and I'll do something to do with those words. But when you've got a project like this where you do know exactly what it is you want to say something about, in which case here is dandelions, I do look that up on the internet, and I've decided just to, as you can see here, to add a few more splatters because I thought these looked a bit black, and I'm just doing exactly the same things that I did on the little word plaque itself. So I looked up dandelion on the internet, and there wasn't actually that much that was very inspiring. I think the dandelion itself is got a bit of a bad rap, particularly here in the UK, because we say as children that if you touch a dandelion it'll make you wet the bed. I don't know why, a little bit odd, but we've got a love of the actual dandelion clock, you know, and delight as children blowing the seed heads and seeing the little seeds fly away and making our wishes. And it's that I decided to use as, it's not a quote, just a couple of words I came up with myself. So dandelions grow wishes is what I'm going to go with, and I think that it'd be quite a nice little reminder of you know, the fact that actually if you want those dandelion clocks, and I know that we as stampers love all those seed head stamps that we buy, you can't have them without the dandelion, so I'm going to celebrate the dandelion on this little home decor project. So I'm just using a pencil to draw the wording in, and I'm deliberately being higgledy-piggledy, mainly because my handwriting isn't that neat, and I'm going to show you a way to disguise that a little bit. So I've just drawn in my words with a pencil, and then I'm going to paint them in with a fine paintbrush and some black distress paint. Now, if you haven't got a very steady hand with a paintbrush, and actually I don't really have a huge steady hand, I probably would have used a marker had I not ruined a lot of my markers by being a little bit too eager and drawing on top of wet paint. So I need to take a trip to the shop to get some more black pens. But I'm doing all right here with a very fine paintbrush and my distress paint. And I think the trick is not to have your paint too thick so that it does run a bit like ink. So once I've got my little letters in place, then I'm going to stylize the writing a little bit with the addition of some dots. So I'm just dipping the end of my paintbrush into the paint and then touching my craft mat just to get rid of sort of a big puddle of the paint, and then dotting the ends of each of the letters. And you'll have seen this style in lots of places, I'm sure, but this is actually how you can do it with a paintbrush. So I'm just using the end of the paintbrush to add the dots to the letters. And I deliberately left a little bit of space on the left hand side because I just wanted to add some of those little dandelion wishes. So I'm just drawing a couple of little seed heads. Again, I'm using the end of my brush just to make the actual seed that dangles from the end of the little fluffy seed heads. These are quite easy to do, so it's a bit like an umbrella without any umbrella. And I'm just adding 3 little seed heads to this little word plaque, and I think it just finishes it off nicely. At least I hope you agree it's a nice finishing touch. Now if you have any little mistakes, and I've got a bit of pencil showing, just take your white paint once your black paint's dry and just go over and tidy that up. Next I'm just marking the ends of my little word plaque so I know where to put these little swirls, and I'm just adding some hot glue to the end because most of it's going to be hanging off the canvas, and making sure that it just sits underneath where the plaque will be. So just past my little pencil marks and making sure that they're both even on each side. And then again I'm just adding a little tip of glue to each end of my little word plaque and sitting it in place. And I think once this is all finished I'm going to go back and tidy up the back of this piece by painting everything with black soot. So it just tidies up any messy paint marks that I've got left behind. For those of you that don't already know, you can use your distress inks to colour ribbons, and I'm using American seam binding, and then I'm just wiping some of the mustard seed distress ink on my craft mat, and then I'm going to spray it with water, which is what I've just gone away to fill up, and there we go. Spray the ink with water and then just sort of scrunch up your ribbon and dot it into the puddle of ink. And I'm just using a little bit of wild honey as well, so it matches my dandelions basically. And when you're happy with the colour that you've achieved, and this is really a great way to make it match your project, I'm just drying it carefully, don't burn your hands, with my heat gun and keeping that crinkled look. I'm going to use a length of the ribbon just to act as a hanger at the top of the little plaque. I was wondering whether to double up, but I think it would be a bit too thick. So I'm going to use a single strand of ribbon, and I'm just doing it quite simply by tying a knot. And I was going to leave knotted ends, but I thought it looked a little bit too messy, as you will see. So I'm just tying it off evenly to start with. And then once I trim the ribbon off, I'm not too happy with how that looks. And even if I added more tails to that, I didn't think it would look very nice. So I've cut them short, and then I'm going to tie a little bow on one side. And then again, just trimming the ends when I can untangle myself from the end of the ribbon. So just a little bow, make sure that it doesn't encroach on your little words. And because I've cut everything short, I'm just adding a tiny little bit of glue into the knot to make sure that it doesn't come undone. Now I am going to double up my ribbon, and I'm just tying a small bow, and that's going to sit at this bottom corner. So sorry, I did that slightly off camera there. I'm just frilling it up so that it looks nice and trimming the edges or the ends of the ribbon. So just uncrinkling it a little bit so that it looks nice. And that's going to sit there. And then I had, I can't claim this idea of as my own because I did see it on Pinterest and I thought, wow, that's really fab. And today I went for a walk with my husband and my dog Comet, and I collected a few of those little dandelion seed heads, and I'm going to pop them into a little tiny bottle so that I've got a couple of wishes on my little art project. So I've got some tiny bottles. Now, I'm not sure whether these are Tim Holtz or Creative Expressions because I've got them all gathered together, but both companies make these little tiny bottles, and I'm sure that other companies do too. So there's my little Dandelion Clock, and I'm just popping in a couple of those little seed heads. I'm trying to keep them all up the same way, and I'm just putting 3 or 4 inside just in case we need a wish in the future. So I'm trying to be delicate so that you can see the actual whole seed head and that they don't get crushed. So they just about fit perfectly in this little bottle. So it was at this point that I thought, you know what, you can't really see them. So what can we do to make them stand out a little bit more? And I decided that I wanted to add something to the back of the bottle so that you could see the little tiny delicate seed heads inside. And I thought about a piece of paper at first, but I decided to paint the bottle instead. So I'm just using my distress paint to do that. And this one, you need to be a little bit careful if you decide to use your heat gun to dry it, because you don't want to crack the bottle. So probably best leave it dry naturally before you actually try and attach it to your project. And I'm going to make a little label for my bottle, so I've just cut out 2 half-inch circles of black card. I'm just using glue to stick those 2 circles together so that they've got a little bit of extra strength, and then I'm using a white pen just to write the words "Make a Wish." A little difficult to see on camera, but that's definitely what it says. And then I'm going to, because you'll be able to see this little charm from both sides, I'm going to make sure I get it the right way up. So I'm piercing the hole above my wording so I know where to write on the opposite side. So now I'm deciding how to attach my little bottle of wishes to my project, and I'm just using a little bit of baker's twine to add the little Make-A-Wish charm. And had I had some glossy accents I would have, and I still probably will go back and glossy accent the charm, but at the moment I've run out and I'm just waiting for a new supply. So I'm adding a very small link from some old jewellery to the top of the actual charm itself, and then making sure it's closed and threading it onto my baker's twine. And then again, I just made a few little decisions. First of all, I thought I was going to go with bow, but I thought the bow again looked a little bit bulky on the top of the bottle. So you'll see that I changed my mind and go with just a knot. And I've also picked out this little heart-shaped paper clip, and I was going to try and hang the string from the paper clip, but I didn't think that was going to work, and instead I'm going to attach everything with some hot glue. And it was at this point that I decided I wasn't too keen on the bow, and I'm going to go with a knot. So it's an artist's prerogative to change their mind, which I'm doing here. Just make sure that if you're using a knot that you add a little bit of glue just to make sure nothing comes undone. And I will just mention here that the distress paint is a little bit delicate on the bottle, so be careful that you don't scratch it off before you get it attached to your project. So I'm using my little heart and I'm just gluing the bottle into place, and making sure that little Make-A-Wish charm is sitting so that you can read it. So as I finish off with a couple of golden yellow gems, it was at this point that my camera memory card filled up, and so that was definitely a sign that this project was well and truly finished, and I hope you've enjoyed it and that it inspires you to look around your house to see what you can make to brighten up your home and to bring some of your own personal art into your surroundings. It really is a great thing to do, and people love to see what you've made. So I hope that I've told the story of the dandelion, and that you can appreciate them next time you see them in the fields, and that they're busy growing wishes just for you. So here's a little close-up of that little bottle of wishes, and I hope one of them isn't the one that's going to make me win the lottery one day, and I hope that you've enjoyed this little home decor project and that it's given you some inspiration, and that you go and have a look at the things, the bits and pieces that you've got of chipboard or die cuts that you could make up a little project similar to this one. I'm pretty sure that you can come up with other flowers with other sentiments, but it's a nice little simple project to get your teeth into. So I'm off to link my project up to Simon Says Stamp, and to see what everybody else has been making with the theme of this week's challenge, which was yellow, and I look forward to sharing some more creativity with you soon. If you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe and check out all my other videos. There's lots of things to see on lots of different subjects, so I'm sure that you'll find something that you like, whether it's art journaling, scrapbooking, card making, or home decor projects like these. So until next time, thank you for watching. So as usual, I'm just going to share a link, this time to a playlist for my home decor items. So I'm just adding item number 3 now as you watch this video, and I thought you might like to see how I made this distress ink sampler. It took me absolutely ages, but it looks fun on my wall, and I hope you enjoy the video.